All right, let's go over this warm-up. So, do you guys see the little M in front of the angle symbol right here? That stands for the measure of angle M. So we are told that the measure of angle M equals 2 times 58 degrees. So all you need to do on number 1 is 2 times 58. Which is? 116. Good. 116 degrees is your answer for number 1. Alright, number 2 is the same setup. So we are told that the measure of angle B is 1/2 times 130. So all you need to do is 1/2 times 130. Which gives you 65. Good. Any questions on those two? Next one's a little bit harder. This one is harder because the measure of the angle is not by itself. So this is our unknown in this equation. So if you want to rewrite it with that just being an x, that's probably something you're a little more familiar with. But we have 1/2 times this unknown value equals 26 degrees. So how do I get rid of multiplying by 1/2? Divide by 1/2. Good. So you are going to divide both sides by 1/2. Now, if you have a calculator, that would work just fine. If you don't have a calculator and you're dividing by 1/2 by hand, dividing by 1/2 is actually the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So you flip it and it's the same thing as multiplying by 2. So again, in your calculator, you could do 26 divided by 1/2, or you could do 26 times 2 and you should get the exact same answer. Does anyone have that answer for me? 52, very good. What are your questions on the first 3? Okay, the next 2 are just a review of how to solve equations. Number 4 is a 2-stepper. Where do I want to start? Yeah, you want to add the 9. Good. We undo adding and subtracting first. To undo subtracting 9, we add 9. That leaves me with 2x equals 18. Then what? Divide both sides by 2. And x equals 9. Now, number 5 is probably not one you've seen since algebra. We haven't done any in this class like this. We have x's on both sides of the equal sign. Does anyone remember how to start this? You subtract something, not the 15. Yeah, you want to subtract the 7x. The first thing you want to do is get all your x's together. So you might say, well, why can't we subtract the 8x? You could, but you'd be left with nothing over here. You'd kind of be going around in circles. So it's a lot easier if you just get the x's together by subtracting that 7x. What is 8x minus 7x? 1x. Good. I'm actually going to write it up here because I'm out of room. 1x is the same thing as just x. And then on the right side, you're left with 15. So our solution here is 15. What are your questions on the warm-up? All right, put your names on the warm-up. Put them to the corner of your desk. I will be around in 1 second to collect those while you get your notes started. So today we are doing section 2.2. It's all about angle bisectors. Make sure you get the title, the section number, and the objective. If you are someone that likes to plan ahead, there are 4 examples today, but the 4th one has 2 parts. our objective today is to bisect an angle. So yesterday we were bisecting segments, cutting a segment into two congruent pieces. Now we are doing the exact same thing but with angles. Any questions before we get moving? Alright, you have one vocabulary word today. It is angle bisector. So an angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle into two congruent angles. If you forget what congruent means, it means they're the same or their measures are equal. So if you want to add that next to the word congruent, that might help you remember. So I have an angle here. I am going to bisect it. So I'm going to add a ray that cuts it into two congruent angles. Now, you may remember yesterday, and you don't need to write this segment in your notes, but I'm just going to refresh your memory. Do you remember we'd add little marks to the segments to show that they were congruent? You can do the exact same thing with the angles. It just looks a little different. So you draw a little arc mark through the angle, and then do the same thing through the other angle. So something like that, that means they're congruent. Or you can make it a little fancier. You can draw little tick marks on there. You'll see lots of different little markings, but as long as they're the same, it means those two angles are congruent. So again, angle bisector just takes a larger angle, cuts it in half, two equal parts. What are your questions on angle bisector? All right, here is our first example. All I want you to do in your notes is draw the diagram. So I want you to draw an angle MNP and then draw a ray bisecting that angle. Label the ray NQ. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we will take all those words in the problem and we will use it to label the diagram. So by the end, your diagram should describe everything that's written in that first example. So again, just draw the diagram and we'll go from there. So the question says that NQ, ray NQ, bisects the angle MNP. So I am going to show that that's a bisector by marking these as congruent angles. So I'll mark them like that. So by marking that diagram that those two are congruent, we've shown what is stated in the first sentence, that that ray NQ is the bisector. Now, it says that MNP, so the big angle, so I'm going to just label it like this to show that it's the entire angle, is 74 degrees. I am looking for these two things, the measure of angle MNQ and the measure of angle PNQ. Then we're going to say what type of angle they are and how do we know that. So, MNQ is this smaller angle on the left, and PNQ is this smaller angle on the right. So if the entire thing is 74, and we bisected the 74, we should now have two congruent smaller angles. So what are you going to do with the 74 to find the measure of the smaller two? Divide it by 2. So I need to do 74 divided by 2. What would that give me? What did you say? 37? So these smaller angles are both going to be 37 degrees. And then, of course, you can double check. It makes sense if this is 37 and this is 37 and you added those together, you will end up where you started with the larger angle being 74 degrees. Now, what type of angle are all these angles that we've been talking about? The 74, the 37, the 37, they're all... These two are congruent, good, but if I had to label them like acute, right, obtuse, straight, they are acute. And how do I know they are acute? Their measure is, that's the less than symbol, they're less than 90 degrees. So they're all acute angles. I know they're all acute angles because they are less than 90 degrees. Raise your hand if you need more time with this example. No takers? All right. Here's example 2. Now, example 2 doesn't have a diagram, so let's draw one. You don't really need to write all this stuff. We are going to show all this information in the diagram that we draw. So I know I have some ray that starts at A and goes through the point B that's going to bisect an angle. So I'm going to draw that angle first. I know this is angle F, A, H, and it has a bisector that starts at A and goes out through some point B. Since it's a bisector, I can label these angles as being congruent. I am also given that the measure of BAF is 38 degrees. So this smaller angle on the left is 38 degrees. I am asked to find in part A the measure of angle HAB and the measure of angle FAH. Okay, so let's start with HAB. Anyone have a guess for angle HAB? Yes, ma'am. It'd be 38 degrees. We know since AB is the bisector that the two smaller angles should be the same. So if the one on the left is 38 degrees, the FAB, then the HAB is also 38 degrees. The next question, though, isn't as easy. Now I'm asked for the whole thing, the FAH, the big guy. What am I going to do? Add 38 and 38. What do you get? 76 degrees. Wonderful. What are your questions so far? Very good. Part B is an acute angle. Whoops, can't spell. Acute. These are all acute. 38, 38, and 76 are all acute. And again, the reason for these all being acute is they are less than 90 degrees. Remember that symbol? It's actually the same symbol. It can mean angle or it can mean less than. What are your questions? right, let's jump to number 3. Again, if you want to just draw the diagram, as long as we do some good labeling, we should be able to figure out everything that was written up in number 3 without writing it. So I am given that ray UV bisects WUT. What can I add to my diagram to show that that ray is a bisector? Yeah, 2 little markings that show that the angles are congruent. I'll just do this one. A little arc mark with a little tick mark through it. Again, if you want to do like 2 little arc marks or like 3 arc marks, as long as they are the same marking, we know that the angles are congruent. Now we're also given a little more information in this diagram. They give us a smaller angle on the right, so angle TUV is 40 degrees. Then I am asked to find the measure of angle WUV and the measure of angle WUT. So WUV first, that's this guy on the left. Any ideas? 40 degrees, good. It should be the exact same since ray UV is a bisector of WUT. The 2 smaller angles should be congruent. And then do we know the big measure? 80, how'd you get 80? Add 40 and 40, or you could do 40 times 2. Either way, you get 80. Now, do I need to go on and say that these are acute angles? No, it doesn't ask you for that. If you want to do extra work, you can be my guest, but we are just asked to find those 2 angle measures. What are your questions so far about angle bisectors? You see how it's very similar to yesterday's segment bisectors? Yeah. The only difference is your diagrams will be a little different. We're talking about degree measures of angles instead of lengths of segments. Ready for our last example? All right. It has 2 parts. Again, if you label your diagrams, you can avoid writing out the GA, the ray GA bisects FGH. You can show that information with a well-labeled diagram. So I'm going to do 2, 2. And instead of finding the angle measure, I'm taking this one a step farther. I actually have to find the value for x. So it's going to be a little harder. Alright, so in example A, I know that FGA is congruent to AGH. So what can I do with the 3x and the 45? Saying 2 things are congruent is another way to say that their measures are the same. In math, we call the same congruent, or it's an E word. Equal or even, yes. So we are setting these 2 values equal to one another. So I have 3 times x equals 45. If you want to put the little degree symbols, that's fine. they won't change what you're doing mathematically. How do I get the x by itself now? Divide both sides by 3. Good. So what is x? 15. Wonderful. Now, if you are someone who likes to double check your work, you can go ahead and plug 15 right in for this x. 3 times 15 is 45, so you're saying that both angles measure 45 degrees, which means they're congruent, so this problem makes sense. Questions on part A. Part B, what do you guys got? I know that FGA is congruent to AGH, just like the one above. So I should start by anyone? Anyone? The angles are congruent, so their measures are the same. How do you show that something is the same in a math class? You set them? Come on, guys, give me something. You set them? Equal. Thank you. Oh, man, you guys are making my job difficult today. You are going to set them equal. The angles are congruent, so their measures are equal. Set them equal. Solve for x. How do I get x by itself here? You subtract 20. The opposite of adding 20 is subtracting 20. Good. So you get 40 equals x. Or, usually we write the x in the front. X equals 40. Now, a lot of students don't like when the x is in the second half of the equation. They just prefer it to be up front. If you want to write this equation so that it's x plus 20 equals 60, if that's something you're more familiar with, more comfortable with, it's fine. You can pick which angle goes in the front of your equation since they are congruent. What are your questions? Anybody need more time? Your homework tonight is worksheet 2.2, practice A. So once you guys all get a copy of this, I want to talk through those fill-in-the-blank problems. I find those to be the most challenging. So let's go ahead and look at number 1 and number 2. We are given this diagram. I have A, B, D, C. And then it is labeled so that we know that the two smaller angles are congruent. Everybody with me? Problem number 1 says blank is bisected by blank. So we want the big angle first, and then we want to say what is bisecting that big angle. So the big angle is what? The big one. Yes, the big angle is A, B, C, and it is being bisected. We know that bisectors are always rays. So what is the ray that is bisecting A, B, C? BD, good. Starts at B, goes through D. So again, number 1 should read angle ABC is bisected by ray DB. Number 2 is a hard one. Number 2 says the measure of angle ABC is blank the measure of ABD. So let's talk this over. Basically, the big angle is blank the measure of one of the little angles. The big angle is blank the measure of the little angle. So how does the big one relate to the little one? Is it 3 times as big? Is it half as big? The big one is the same as the little one. The small one's half the big, so the big one is... The small one is half the big. That's what you just said. That's correct. But this question says the big one is blank the measure of the small one. Not 3 times, not once, 2 times, or it's twice the measure of the small one. So the big one is twice the measure of the small one. If you don't like that word, you can just put like times 2. The big one should be 2 times as big as the small one. So again, that's why we do these together. Sometimes the wording gets a little tricky, but that's the answer for 1 and 2 on worksheet 2.2. Practice A. Any other questions you want to go through?
Well, how do you do 12 through 15?
How do you do 12 through 15 is the question. 12 through 15 says use the diagram on the right. Decide whether the statement is true or false. So if ray BD bisects ABC, then ABD is congruent to ABC. So that's saying if it's a bisector, the little one is the same as the big one. Is that true? No, that's false. So you'd say false. So you're just reading through those and using the diagram to the right to say whether it's true or false. So we decided that 12 was false. Any other ones you want a little clarification on? All right, you have the rest of class to work on this. It'll be due next time I see you when you walk in the door. Raise your hand if you need help.